In the sprawling, interconnected tapestry of the galaxy, war had evolved into a dance of numbers, probabilities, and algorithms. Organic life had become precious, too valuable to risk on the brutal fronts of war. Instead, conflicts were waged through the precise and calculated movements of robotic armies. The Galactic Union, a vast coalition of species that maintained peace and stability across hundreds of star systems, had imposed a strict robot protocol. This mandate enforced that only synthetic soldiers, robots, and AI could engage in warfare, sparing biological beings from the horrors of battle. Each species specialized in designing their own robotic soldiers, uniquely crafted to reflect their civilization's ideals and strengths. The Avorthians, a species renowned for their art and creativity, designed sleek, graceful machines that resembled abstract sculptures more than weapons. The rugged, rocky Urkin, a race whose planet was made of endless desert and mountains, crafted durable and brute force mechs that could crush most opposition with a single swing. The Tari, a species with a crystalline physiology, engineered dazzling robot soldiers that refracted light as they moved, creating illusions on the battlefield to deceive their enemies. Each of these machines was a masterpiece in its own right, an expression of its creator's values and fears, crafted for one purpose alone: to dominate. Most wars were fought by proxy, with battles streamed to the home worlds for public entertainment and pride. There was a certain detachment in this arrangement. Civilizations could watch their forces conquer or fall from the safety of their living rooms, far removed from the actual stakes of battle. Victories were celebrated, and defeats mourned, but always with the knowledge that no organic life had been risked. War was seen as a sophisticated sport, a test of engineering and strategic prowess, where the players were machines without a single strand of organic tissue or DNA. It was a peaceful, sanitized form of violence. Species across the galaxy grew complacent, believing that they had transcended the need for flesh and blood soldiers. They saw themselves as advanced, evolved. Primitive species, those who still engaged in physical combat without robots, were viewed with disdain. After all, how could such a barbaric practice ever compare to the calculated elegance of robotic warfare? However, beneath this polished veneer of civilized combat lay a deep unease. Not all species were content with the robot protocol. Some felt that something fundamental had been lost. Generations had grown up without a single soldier returning from the front lines, sharing stories of the fight. There were no scars of honor, no tales of courage and sacrifice, only statistics, data reports, and holographic replays. But those voices were few and scattered, dismissed as nostalgic fools or warmongers by a society that valued progress over sentimentality. The complacency was shattered one day when a single scout ship drifted into the Galactic Union's borders. It was an old, battered vessel, emitting signals in a language unrecognized by Union records. Initially, the scout ship went unnoticed as it approached through the unmonitored border of the uncharted edge worlds. But as it moved deeper into Union space, it began sending out a message on an open frequency, one that the Union couldn't ignore. The message was simple, translated into every Union dialect: "We come to test the strength of the galaxy." The Galactic Union's High Council was alerted immediately. They expected the message to be from some previously undiscovered species seeking entry into the Union, or perhaps a small rogue civilization attempting to assert itself in the galaxy's vast expanse. What they didn't expect were the rumors that followed the scout ship's arrival. The first accounts came from miners on the moon Orcs 7, an isolated rock on the edge of Union space. These miners reported seeing unusual figures strangely dressed, large, and unarmored. The beings from the scout ship made no attempt to disguise themselves or to communicate. They simply disembarked and began exploring the mining station. Union security arrived and attempted to apprehend them for questioning, but the strange visitors, who referred to themselves as Deathworlders, refused to cooperate. They seemed amused by the presence of the Union's robot security forces and resisted arrest with alarming ease. Footage from the security feed soon reached the Union's central systems, where it was broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. The recording showed these Deathworlders, towering and muscular, dismantling Union robots with their bare hands. In seconds, they tore through machines that could withstand plasma bolts and lasers, pulling them apart as if they were toys. They seemed to relish the challenge, grinning and shouting in a language that sounded like an ancient chant or battle cry. The Deathworlders moved with a strength and agility that defied the Union's understanding. They threw security drones against walls, shattered mech limbs with single blows, and seemed impervious to the few retaliatory hits that managed to land. Their skin, thick and rough, shrugged off the laser pulses as if they were nothing more than an inconvenience. When one of the Deathworlders tore the head off a robot and held it up in triumph, the galaxy collectively held its breath. The Galactic Union was thrown into chaos. For centuries, they had believed that synthetic soldiers were the peak of warfare, that no organic life could hope to match the calculated precision of AI or the indestructible frames of the mechs. But these Deathworlders, with no armor, no weapons, and no hesitation, had shattered that illusion in moments. As news of the Deathworlders' arrival spread, their reputation grew rapidly, fueled by rumor and speculation. Reports came in from more outposts on the edge of Union space. Witnesses spoke of barehanded warriors who had no need for machines, who seemed to revel in the primal thrill of physical combat. Some Union citizens began to question what they had seen as progress. Had their civilization truly evolved, or had they merely hidden from the real dangers of the universe? The Galactic Union's High Council assembled for an emergency meeting, their chambers filled with tension. Representatives from all member species were present, many visibly anxious. These Deathworlders are nothing but barbarians, the Anti ambassador argued, her feathers flaring. They are a primitive species that has not yet learned the advantages of robotic warfare. Why should we allow them to disrupt our peace? But not all were convinced. The young and curious among the council murmured among themselves, fascinated by the sheer raw power these Deathworlders displayed. They saw something intriguing, perhaps even something missing in their own highly evolved society. For some, the Deathworlders represented a forgotten truth, that survival wasn't just about calculation and efficiency. It was about grit, determination, and the will to push beyond one's limits. The High Council debated for hours, but in the end, they could not ignore the growing interest in the Deathworlders. It was decided that a diplomatic team would be sent to the edge of Union space, where the Deathworlders had reportedly set up camp on a small moon. The objective was clear: to understand this new threat, to gauge the motives of these strange warriors, and, if possible, to convince them to abide by the robot protocol. The diplomats left with a mixture of trepidation and curiosity. No one could predict what awaited them on that desolate moon. But one thing was certain: the Deathworlders had brought a storm to the galaxy, and nothing would ever be the same. As the diplomats departed, the galaxy buzzed with anticipation, and across countless worlds, the robotic soldiers of the Union stood ready, prepared to meet these mysterious, primal warriors in a clash of steel against flesh. The galaxy's playground of machines was about to meet the unrestrained force of organic willpower, and the galaxy watched, breathless, waiting to see if their robotic empire could withstand the barehanded might of the Deathworlders. The Galactic Union's diplomatic team departed from their headquarters in a sleek Union envoy vessel, their minds weighed down by a mixture of duty, curiosity, and a gnawing anxiety. The transmission from the Deathworlders had challenged the very foundations of the Union's peace maintained by the robot protocol. For centuries, no member species had dared violate it. And yet, here was a group of beings, unapologetically organic, who had seemingly ignored the protocol entirely. What were they after? And how could they possibly hope to compete against the Union's mechanized armies without any machines of their own? The Union's delegation consisted of representatives from 5 different species, each bringing a unique perspective on the issue. Leading the team was Admiral Veclan of the Tarlani, a species with elongated limbs and translucent skin that shimmered in the dim light of the spaceship. Known for their level-headedness and ability to think in terms of pure logic, the Tarlani were often chosen for high-level diplomatic missions. Alongside Veclan was Ambassador Pyre, a Tari with a crystalline exoskeleton that refracted light into dazzling colors, Senhir, a towering, rock-skinned Urkin, and two others from the Union's elite diplomatic corps. Together, they formed a team meant to represent the best qualities of the Union's diversity and strength. As their ship entered the orbit of Orcs 7, the rocky moan where the Deathworlders had last been spotted, they could already see them waiting on the barren surface below. The Deathworlders had not attempted to set up any kind of base or protective encampment. Instead, they stood in a loose formation on the open ground, exposed to the harsh winds and dust storms that swept across the surface. They made no attempt to seek shelter. They simply waited, watching as the Union vessel descended. The landing was rough due to the moon's unpredictable weather, but the Union diplomats remained stoic. As the ramp lowered, the team stepped out, immediately struck by the figures standing before them. Even from a distance, the Deathworlders exuded an undeniable, intimidating presence. Their leader, a massive figure with sharp eyes and a stance that radiated confidence, stepped forward. His name, as they would soon learn, was Kalen Tarek. Kalen stood at least a head taller than any of the Union representatives, his skin a rough, scarred tapestry that told of battles and survival beyond anything they had known. He wore only minimal clothing, practical and rugged, a far cry from the protective armor that Union members were used to in hostile environments. His gaze was sharp, curious, and unwavering. Behind him stood his fellow Deathworlders, each of them bearing the marks of a life shaped by conflict and struggle. Admiral Veclan took a step forward and began the diplomatic introduction, his voice calm and measured. "Greetings, Kalen Tarek of the Deathworlders. I am Admiral Veclan, representing the Galactic Union. We have come to understand your intentions, to explore a path toward peaceful coexistence. We were surprised by your decision to engage in combat without machines. I am here to request that your people adhere to the robot protocol, which has maintained peace and order in our galaxy for centuries." Kalen listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When Veclan finished, Kalen's lips curled into a faint smile. "Robot protocol," he echoed, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate with the ground beneath them. "I've heard of your so-called peace and the wars your machines wage for you. Where we come from, there is no such luxury. War is not a game for machines, it is a matter of survival." Ambassador Pyre, ever diplomatic, stepped in, trying to bridge the cultural gap. "Your world must be quite unique for you to have developed such resilience. But in our galaxy, we have achieved a level of technology that allows us to avoid putting our people in harm's way. Surely, you see the benefit of this?" Kalen turned his steely gaze on the ambassador, and the Union delegation felt the weight of his intensity. "We come from a place you call a death world, a place where every moment is a battle for survival. Our planet is a crucible of heat, cold, predators, and storms. Weakness is punished swiftly and brutally. Those who live on my world learn to survive with their bare hands, with their wits. It's not our nature to rely on machines to fight for us. That's not strength, that's hiding." The diplomatic team exchanged glances. Kalen's words struck them as both archaic and oddly inspiring. These Deathworlders didn't see machines as tools of liberation, but as barriers between themselves and their struggles. War, to them, was a sacred right, something that defined them as a species, that forced them to evolve beyond their limits. Admiral Veclan, attempting to steer the conversation back toward diplomacy, asked, "What is it that you want, Kalen Tarek? Why have you come to our galaxy?" Kalen's expression grew serious, his eyes narrowing. "We have come to challenge ourselves. To test our strength against the greatest this galaxy has to offer. We do not seek conquest or territory. We seek to find our limits and perhaps to break them." The Union delegates were taken aback. These Deathworlders had no interest in material gain, no desire to subjugate or pillage. They sought something far more abstract, a test of strength, a journey of self-discovery. This was a perspective that the Union, with its logic-driven, machine-minded approach to warfare, had never encountered. Senhir, the Urkin representative, known for his bluntness, stepped forward, addressing Kalen directly. "You mean to fight with us? For sport?" Kalen's lips curled into a slight smile, but his eyes remained hard. "It's not sport. Sport is trivial. This is a test. We do not fight for amusement or honor. We fight because it is in our nature to fight. Every battle is a lesson, every victory a stepping stone. And we want to see if your galaxy's strength can match our own." The Union delegation struggled to process this. They were trained diplomats and scholars, people of reason. They had studied countless alien cultures, some far more aggressive than others, but none that approached conflict with such a single-minded, almost philosophical intensity. To the Deathworlders, combat was not violence, it was a form of expression, of self-definition. The conversation turned tense as Admiral Veclan, sensing the strain in the team, attempted a final appeal to reason. "Your beliefs are commendable, Kalen Tarek. But you must understand, our galaxy values peace above all else. We have constructed a society that allows us to pursue knowledge, progress, and innovation without fear of harm. If you continue to reject the robot protocol, you risk destabilizing that peace." Kalen met Veclan's gaze, his face set in grim determination. "Peace? You speak of peace, but what you call peace is a cage of your own making. You have hidden yourselves behind machines and laws, forgetting what it means to be truly alive. My people live and die by our strength, by the strength of our own hands and our own bodies. Your machines cannot teach you that." Silence fell over the group as Kalen's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of his conviction. To the Union delegation, Kalen's worldview was alien, almost incomprehensible. But they couldn't deny the truth in his words. Their societies had long relied on machines to handle the dirty work of survival, removing themselves from the primal realities of conflict. They had lost something fundamental, something the Deathworlders had preserved at the cost of endless hardship. Finally, Ambassador Pyre spoke, her voice soft yet resolute. "If you refuse to abide by the robot protocol, we will have no choice but to defend our peace. You will be met with the full might of our mechanized armies." Kalen's smile returned, sharper this time. "Then we welcome the challenge. But know this, no machine, no matter how strong, can ever truly match the will of a warrior who fights with his own hands." With that, Kalen turned, motioning for his warriors to follow him. The Deathworlders retreated back into the shadows, leaving the Union delegation standing in stunned silence. As the Union diplomats boarded their ship and prepared to leave, they knew that they were facing a threat unlike any they had encountered. The Deathworlders did not seek conquest or submission, they sought only the challenge of combat, to face an enemy they deemed worthy. The message they carried back to the Union was one of foreboding. A new force had emerged, one that refused to hide behind the Union's rules and protocols. And if the Union intended to maintain its peace, they would have to confront a kind of warfare they had long since abandoned. As their ship ascended back into the stars, the Union's diplomatic team couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Deathworlders had thrown down the gauntlet, and soon the entire galaxy would be forced to decide whether they, too, would step out from behind their machines or risk being torn apart by a strength they could scarcely comprehend. The message from the Union's diplomatic team spread through the galaxy faster than light-speed broadcasts. News of the Deathworlders' organic beings who had defeated Union robots with nothing more than bare hands and raw strength captivated every corner of the Galactic Union. And with each retelling, the Deathworlders' legend grew, painted in vivid, terrifying colors, warriors who could dismantle machines like children breaking toys, who wore scars instead of armor and fought not for glory or wealth but for the pure thrill of battle. The Union's High Council chamber, an immense domed structure on the planet Galdra Prime, was filled with an energy rarely felt in its hallowed halls. Representatives from every major species were present, their expressions a blend of disbelief, horror, and grudging admiration. Normally, council meetings proceeded with calm efficiency, but today, chaos reigned. Senators and ambassadors stood, arguing passionately, as the words Deathworlders and Robot Protocol reverberated across the room. High Chancellor Revik, a stoic figure with iridescent scales that glinted under the chamber's artificial lights, raised her hand, demanding silence. Her calm, calculating demeanor usually restored order, but today, even her presence could barely restrain the growing unrest. Ambassadors, she began, her voice echoing, we are here to assess the nature of this threat and the appropriate response. A holographic screen flickered to life in the center of the chamber, displaying footage from the Union's initial encounter with the Deathworlders on Orcs 7. The room fell silent as they watched the figures of Kalen Tarek and his warriors tearing through their finest security drones, moving with a speed and precision that the assembled diplomats could hardly believe. Each impact, each shattering blow, seemed to defy the laws of physics. The Union's strongest robotic forces crumbled under the Deathworlders' relentless, primal onslaught. As the hologram faded, a ripple of whispers swept through the crowd. Senator Ilar of the Avorthians, a tall figure with skin that glowed faintly in blues and greens, stood up, her expression one of barely contained outrage. These Deathworlders are nothing more than barbarians, she exclaimed. We have spent centuries refining our civilizations, building peace and order through careful planning, technological mastery, and the robot protocol. These creatures threaten everything we have worked for. They are a menace to our way of life. Her words resonated with many in the room, and murmurs of agreement rippled outward. But not everyone was convinced. Councillor Finnick, a young representative from the small but fiercely independent Archelian species, rose in response. The Archelians had always been the Union's dissenters, known for their bold, if unorthodox, views. Are they a menace, he countered, or have we become complacent? For generations, we have hidden behind the robot protocol, distancing ourselves from the struggles that once defined our civilizations. We've delegated the fight for survival to machines, forgetting the strength and resilience that made us who we are. Perhaps these Deathworlders remind us of something we've lost. The room erupted in heated debate. On one side were those who saw the Deathworlders as a terrifying regression to a brutal, less civilized era. They viewed the presence of these warriors as a threat to the Union's peace, stability, and ethical code. On the other side, a growing faction especially among the younger delegates felt an undeniable attraction to the raw, visceral power the Deathworlders represented. To them, the Deathworlders were not barbaric but a reminder of the resilience that came from fighting one's own battles, something the Union had sacrificed in the name of progress. High Chancellor Revik, realizing that this debate could consume the entire meeting, raised her hand for silence once more. Let us not forget, she said, her voice measured, that the robot protocol was established to protect life. We all know the horrors of war, the devastation it brought to our species before we embraced machines. Our ancestors made a deliberate choice to remove ourselves from direct conflict, to evolve beyond violence. But, she continued, glancing around the room, it seems these Deathworlders have presented us with a challenge. And we must determine our response carefully. Councillor Finnick leaned forward, his tone challenging. With all due respect, High Chancellor, we cannot ignore the possibility that the Deathworlders may have a point. For too long, we've been relying on machines to do the fighting, but what if that reliance has weakened us? We could be left defenseless if another threat, one that targets organics directly, ever arrives. The tension in the room was palpable. Councillor Ilar shot Finnick a glare and retorted, and what would you propose, Finnick? That we abandon the protocol, throw ourselves back into the brutality of physical warfare. You speak of strength, but that path leads only to chaos and suffering. We have ascended beyond such barbarism. Perhaps we haven't, came a quiet voice from the back. It was Terrell, the Anti representative, known for her calm pragmatism. Her delicate feathered features were thoughtful as she continued, perhaps we've just hidden from it, tucked ourselves away behind technology, forgetting what it truly means to stand on the battlefield. The High Chancellor, sensing the momentum of the discussion shifting, decided to propose a bold course of action. The Deathworlders have challenged us, and we must respond. To refuse would be to invite chaos. If we dismiss them outright, they may interpret it as weakness or cowardice. However, there is another path, one that could allow us to maintain our dignity and assess the full extent of their abilities. The council listened, rapt, as she continued. We will invite the Deathworlders to engage in a controlled encounter with Union forces. Not a war, but a demonstration. We will gather a specialized contingent, both our finest robotic units and a small number of organic soldiers. This hybrid approach will showcase our strength while allowing us to meet their challenge head-on. A murmur of excitement and trepidation spread through the room. It was an unprecedented decision. For centuries, Union forces had not included organic soldiers. These soldiers were relics of a bygone age, trained in ceremonial combat but never deployed in real warfare. To mix organics and machines was a concept almost as alien as the Deathworlders themselves. Yet the thrill of it, the idea of breaking free from the constraints of the protocol, even if only for a single encounter, was palpable. "Where will this demonstration take place?" asked Councillor Fennec, a note of eagerness in his voice. The High Chancellor pressed a button on her console, and a hologram of a remote, rugged planet flickered to life in the center of the chamber. "Solarum 5, she announced. "A neutral world on the outskirts of Union space. Its harsh, varied terrain will allow for a true test of strength and strategy." The council members nodded in agreement, some with barely concealed excitement, others with evident reluctance. The terms of the demonstration would be simple. The Union's hybrid force would face the Deathworlders on Solarum 5 in a battle limited to 1 day and 1 night. The objective wasn't conquest, but rather to test each side's limits. As the details were finalized, there was an air of grim determination among the council members. For the first time in generations, the Union's organic citizens would have to step onto the battlefield, not behind a screen or through a proxy, but with their own lives on the line. After the council meeting concluded, whispers spread quickly through the Union's worlds. The Deathworlders had thrown down a challenge that the Union could not ignore, and soon, across dozens of star systems, a new force was assembled. Robots were paired with elite soldiers, veterans of training simulations who had never expected to see real combat. Some were eager, others fearful, but all felt the weight of the Union's honor on their shoulders. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of Union space, the Deathworlders prepared as well. They saw this encounter not as a clash of civilizations, but as a test of their own mettle. To them, it didn't matter if the Union sent robots, organics, or both. They were ready to meet whatever came at them with unflinching resolve and bare hands. As the Union forces departed for Solarum 5, their journey was broadcast live, drawing the rapt attention of citizens across the galaxy. Billions watched as the Union's fleet cut through space, carrying the hopes, fears, and pride of their worlds. And on every screen, one question loomed large: could machines, algorithms, and advanced tactics stand against the raw, unrestrained might of the Deathworlders? No one knew what to expect on Solarum 5. But as the stars blurred past and the planet grew near, one thing was clear: the galaxy's playground of machines was about to experience a clash like never before. The barren, rocky expanse of Solarum 5 stretched as far as the eye could see, a world marked by jagged cliffs, dense forests, and deep ravines. Its terrain was as hostile as the Deathworlders themselves, perfect for the confrontation that would soon unfold. The Union's forces arrived first, establishing their fortified positions on the high cliffs overlooking a valley that would serve as the main battlefield. Robotic engineers began constructing bunkers and laying sensor grids, deploying drones to map every inch of the surrounding area. The Union's hybrid force was a sight to behold. Hundreds of advanced robots, each crafted for battle with precision, lined up in formation. The machines varied in size and function: nimble scouts, hulking mechs armed with plasma cannons, and swift, agile drones designed for aerial maneuvers. Their AI-driven strategies were already optimizing the battle plan, calculating probabilities, and setting up fail-safe mechanisms. Next to these towering machines stood the organic soldiers, highly trained, outfitted with lightweight exoskeletons that enhanced their strength and agility, and equipped with state-of-the-art energy shields. Though most had never experienced real combat, their determination was palpable. They were the first generation in centuries to set foot on a battlefield as living beings, rather than as spectators behind a screen. Captain Arlen, a decorated officer from the Archelian species, stood at the front of the organic contingent. His exoskeleton, glinting under the harsh sunlight, reinforced his slender frame, and his eyes, a shade of violet unique to the Archelians, were focused on the horizon. He was aware of the gravity of this mission. The Union was placing its faith in him and his team to prove that organic soldiers could still hold their own. "They're coming," one of the drone operators reported, her voice tight with a mixture of excitement and fear. On the other side of the valley, the Deathworlders approached. They marched as one, unarmored, bare-chested, their eyes locked forward with steely resolve. Their leader, Kalen Tarek, walked at the forefront, his presence unmistakable. There were fewer of them than the Union's forces, but they moved with a unified strength and purpose that made their numbers seem irrelevant. They wore no advanced technology, carried no guns, no shields, only their bodies, scarred and hardened by a lifetime on the death world, their eyes blazing with a fierce determination. Kalen raised his hand, signaling for his warriors to halt. They stood across the valley from the Union's forces, silently observing the fortified positions, the glinting metal of the robotic soldiers, the organic soldiers with their augmented bodies and energy shields. Kalen smiled. To him and his people, this sight was a challenge, a test that they had trained their whole lives for. He lifted his voice, letting it boom across the valley. "Galactic Union. Today, we meet not as conquerors or enemies, but as warriors seeking to prove our strength. You have hidden behind machines, but we come to show you what flesh and blood are capable of. Let this battle decide who truly holds the power in this galaxy." The Union's response came in the form of Captain Arlen's voice over the comms, calm and firm. "Deathworlders, you may have strength, but we have precision, strategy, and technology. You face the combined might of the Union." With that, the Union forces initiated the first strike. Drones launched into the air, buzzing toward the Deathworlders with scanning lasers, mapping every muscle twitch, every facial expression. The Deathworlders watched, unflinching, as the drones swarmed around them. Then, in a burst of motion, one of Kalen's lieutenants leapt forward, his hand reaching out like a blur, and grabbed a drone mid-air, crushing it in his fist. Sparks flew, and the Union's forces flinched. These warriors were even faster than they'd expected. The rest of the drones attempted evasive maneuvers, darting upwards, but the Deathworlders exploded into action. They moved like a single, unstoppable wave, leaping and striking with deadly precision, each move coordinated through instinct and years of intense training. Within moments, the sky was raining down broken drones, their remains scattering across the valley floor. Seeing the drones fall, the Union's robotic soldiers began advancing, their formations adjusting in real time. A battalion of mechs moved in from the left flank, plasma cannons charging with a faint hum. From the center, the swift Tari-made robots, lithe and deadly with razor-sharp limbs, sprinted forward, aiming to close the gap and engage in close combat. The Deathworlders charged to meet them, shouting battle cries that echoed across the valley. The ground trembled as they closed the distance, their footsteps like thunder. When the two sides finally collided, it was a whirlwind of flesh and steel. The Union's robots fired plasma bolts, but the Deathworlders dodged, weaving through the blasts with agility honed from surviving the relentless hazards of their home planet. Kalen himself faced down one of the massive mechs, a towering machine with reinforced armor and a cannon designed to level small structures. The mech aimed its weapon, calculating the trajectory to ensure a clean, lethal shot. But Kalen was faster. He darted to the side, sprinting around the mech in a blur, leaping onto its back in a single bound. His hands found the access panel, and with a strength that defied reason, he tore it open, exposing the circuitry inside. Sparks flew as he drove his fist into the mech's core, yanking out wires and metal components in a savage display of raw power. The mech shuddered, fell to its knees, and collapsed with a thunderous crash. Nearby, Captain Arlen watched in disbelief as his finest robotic units were being torn apart. He knew he couldn't hesitate any longer. Signaling to his fellow organic soldiers, he led a charge, his energy shield pulsing around him as they sprinted into the fray. He collided with a Deathworlder, a massive woman with muscles like coiled steel, and they grappled in a brutal exchange of blows. Her strength was overwhelming, even with his exoskeleton amplifying his own, but he held his ground, dodging her strikes with well-trained precision. Finally, he saw an opening and struck her with a charged punch, sending her stumbling back, just enough to give him a moment to catch his breath. Elsewhere on the battlefield, the Deathworlders were dismantling the Union's robotic forces with an almost terrifying ease. They tore off limbs, smashed sensors, and ripped through armor as if it were made of paper. Each movement was fluid, efficient, honed from years of survival on their hostile world. They were relentless, undeterred by wounds or fatigue, driven by a primal force the Union soldiers could scarcely comprehend. Despite their best efforts, the Union's forces began to falter. The robots, though programmed with the most advanced strategies, couldn't adapt to the Deathworlders' unpredictable tactics. And the organic soldiers, though skilled, found themselves outmatched in raw physical strength and endurance. As the day wore on, the battlefield became a chaotic mix of shattered metal, torn ground, and warriors locked in combat. The Union's forces held strong, but it was clear that they were struggling against the Deathworlders' relentless assault. Captain Arlen fought side by side with his soldiers, rallying them, urging them to hold the line, but he could feel the toll the battle was taking. In one of the most intense moments of the fight, Kalen Tarek found himself face-to-face with Captain Arlen. The two leaders sized each other up, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. They were from two different worlds, two different philosophies, but in this moment, they were equals. Kalen grinned, bloodied but triumphant. "Your machines are impressive, Captain. But they lack the will that drives us. They fight because they are commanded. We fight because it is in our very nature." Captain Arlen narrowed his eyes, raising his shield. "You may have strength, Kalen, but we have unity. You fight for the thrill. We fight for peace, for our people." With a nod, they clashed, each blow ringing out like thunder. Kalen's raw power met Arlen's agility and tactical precision, and they moved like dancers, each anticipating the other's moves. The battle was fierce, and both warriors were pushed to their limits, neither willing to yield. As night fell over Solarum 5, the Union called a ceasefire. The battlefield was littered with the remains of both robots and Deathworlders, the ground stained with oil, metal fragments, and, for the first time in centuries, blood. The Union forces, battered but standing, withdrew, and the Deathworlders, though wounded, held their heads high. There was no victor, no clear winner. But in that brutal clash, something had changed. Kalen approached Captain Arlen, extending a hand-aid gesture of respect. "You are stronger than I thought, Captain. Perhaps your galaxy hasn't gone soft after all." Arlen accepted the handshake, his grip firm. "And you, Kalen Tarek, have shown us a strength we had forgotten. Perhaps there is a place for your kind among us, after all." The Deathworlders departed, leaving the Union forces to tend to their wounded and assess the toll of the battle. But as they watched their strange, bare-handed adversaries vanish into the night, the Union soldiers felt a mixture of awe, respect, and a lingering fear. These Deathworlders had reminded them of something they'd lost: a raw connection to the will to fight, to survive, to transcend limits. As word of the battle spread across the galaxy, the Union citizens began to question the path they had taken. Perhaps there was value and strength beyond machines, and facing hardship not as distant observers but with one's own hands and spirit. And so, the galaxy was changed. The Deathworlders had shown the Union that power was not merely in circuits and algorithms, but in the indomitable will of those who fought with their bare hands.